I don't know how we apply mathematics to the human body as such. Like say, like we can with astrophysics, we can use math to determine the orbit of a planet. They were able to predict where a planet might be using math and then find it years later. The body doesn't isn't is mathematically predictable. Uh,
So it's me, Gary Carter again, and I'm here with my good friend David Lesondak. And to say good friend, that really warms my heart because we've got to know each other over I don't know how many years now, but I just think there's been a connection between the two of us that the moment we met, it was warm. That's the only way
yes.
I can describe it, you know. And actually in
Mhm.
Leipzig when we were together at the sports, no, it was the
The fascia summer school.
Fascia Summer School in Leipzig. We just had that one night, I think, hanging out in a bar there in the hotel, and we just went
Hmm.
completely different sort of place in how we related as friends, and it's just been amazing ever since, really. And I
Yeah,
don't go on.
well, my turn here to write back at you. In particularly, I don't know when this is going to air or how this fits in, but in this current time of COVID-19 and coronavirus, I've been gaining a lot of health benefits by so you can think about it is social media distancing.
Mhm.
But Gary and you and I met on Facebook
We did.
because we had a lot of the same friends, you know. And I just your name would pop up liking things, or you'd put in your cheeky little comments. I'm like, well, who is this bloke? And you know, and we like a lot of the same stuff, and we seem to like a lot of the same people, so we friended each other. And I felt like I got to know you,
Mm.
or at least how you look at things or think about things. So by the time we met, it was just like, oh, yeah, that's you. It's like there was already this connection that we had made just through not even really sharing things between each other, but through shared association. So that's one of the, if I'm really down on social media right now, I can say that our friendship probably wouldn't have existed without social media. We would have met each other, but there wouldn't have been that
That's true.
bond. And yes,
There is an
the
element,
lovely night in the hotel gin bar.
yes. But I think there's an element where you can allow some of your brain to be exposed on social media. Sometimes, I mean, sometimes not always the best
Hmm.
part of the brain. Like you said, cheeky comments. I have to think twice about sometimes what I write. But
Oh, I've never done that, Gary. I've never done that.
yeah, Sarah, my wife's told me you just need to read a few things before you post them. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah,
Well, remember. I mean, for you youngins out there, we used to do this thing called letter writing, and we would actually we would use one of these here pens and paper, and we would actually use our fingers and ink. But there was this thing that if you're mad at somebody and you want to write them a letter, write them the letter and then put it in the drawer
yeah.
and then let it sit overnight like you would a really good pizza dough and
Mm.
let it rise and go back and look at it the next morning and see like, okay, do I still feel that way? Do I want to change how I want to say anything? Should I even just send this away? Just feel better having gotten it off my chest, and then make your decision and move forward. Well, with the beauty of social media, we don't have time. We don't need to have time to think about what we're saying and how we're saying it. We can just put it out there because everybody wants the hot take, and the hot take is not always the best take.
No, not at all, not at all. I've been burnt a few times on that just from my own doing. Um,
Hmm.
And a lot of you would recognize David as the author of Fascia, What It Is and Why It Matters, and I'll bring that into the conversation as well. But you're also a manual therapist, and we both come from the same school there, which is the original KMI, which is now anatomy training school. But
Yep.
I kind of, I will speak candid. Well, it's not so candid. I'll be open about that. Is I think I preferred it as KMI, and the anatomy trains was a separate sideline to that. But of course, I
Hmm.
understand what they've done there. And David also was involved in, I think, the filming of some of the dissection work
Yes.
on the Anatomy Trains Revealed, wasn't
Hmm. Yes. I Anatomy Trains Revealed and Anatomy Trains Revealed 2 more revealing. So there was an initial there was an initial single disc documentary that to some people appeared really hyper caffeinated. And to me, I was trying to get that single camera documentary. Oh, what's going on there with smash cuts and zooms, and made it deliberately a little sloppy because the frame for that was what's it like to spend a week in a cadaver lab? Oh, and here's some anatomy trains, as
Mm.
opposed to the second edition, which was 3 discs and much more of a here's this line, here's why this line is important, here's the whole line, here's
Yeah.
each piece of the line. So that had they were two
Yeah.
very different projects.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But those were a blast.
That is interesting as well because the lines can be the lines, and we know that those lines are, and with love and respect to Tom, we know that
Hmm.
lines have been anatomized out of the body. Something that we will do in in our dissection labs is, have the students there and they'll look at the structure, and once we've managed to get skin and superficial fascia away and we start removing deep fascia, we ask them to find an anatomy train, and they have to go and make it with a blade. They don't just see it there as an entire structure. But it's
Hmm.
interesting. I think in the fact that the lines are the lines to some degree is that with that work that you can go back in and take the camera in from different views and then say, oh yeah, and here's the anatomy trains, is that there's so many different relationships that these things have in the body, and the dimensions,
Hmm.
directions that they start to travel in. They would only, I think, behave in one direction only. And when the moment you switch your movement from one place to the next, you've got an interaction of all these things happening at the same time, rather than just one.
Yeah, because we're really complicated. We're really complicated. But I think at least in the therapeutic context, their their validity as coherent maps. And I think Jan Vilke has found the most peripheral evidence for the superficial backline, or as some people refer to it for, I don't know, reasons of copyright, the posterior chain. I really don't get involved in the naming of things. He's found a lot of supplementary evidence for that. So for those of you who don't know about this, Jan Vilke is a is a researcher who has done exhaustive literature reviews of dissective uh, papers published on dissection, looking for findings that match up with some of these ideas for fascial and myofascial chains. So this dissection paper over here might be studying one phenomenon, but oh, over here in this paragraph, they talk about a relationship between the sacrotuberous ligament and the hamstring. All right, that checks out. So he's reviewed hundreds of these dissection papers, just looking for the odd fact that supplements these other findings.
Yeah.
And he's just absolutely brilliant at it. But as soon as you put a spiral into that motion, suddenly, if what I hear you saying, Gary, is we're going up from the hamstring to the sacrotuberous ligament, then boom, suddenly we're into the erector spinae on the opposite side.
Mm.
And how does that fit in? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that and so many others, because it would be the same with the front of the body. If you look at, I don't know, the lower part of the superficial front line, by the time you get to the pelvis, you could go around the back of the body rather than up the front. So it just makes more of a three-dimensional thing, because there's a certain direction that it would go, rather than making a dog leg and just go straight up the abdominals again.
Well, it's a mechanical connection. It's a mechanical connection, which reminds me. God, okay. So as usual, those of you who maybe don't know me in person, my tangents have tangents. So I want to talk about the superficial front line because I don't know if you know when I destroyed the perfect model we have at the upper part of that. But what I want to know is when is your book coming out? Because you have been you have been coming up with your own ideas, and you've done way more dissection work than I ever have. And you know that with a good imagination and the right tools, you can fashion almost any connection that you want. But what I like about your models is they they're well thought out and they have a strong functional component. And if I'm excited to get a better understanding of those maps as you see them, because I know that's going to improve the way I do therapy, and that's going to help my patients get better, faster outcomes. So when's your book coming out?
I don't know right now. We actually work quite hard on the editing on that, because it's all being self-published. So the problem with the self-published right now is we can keep moving the deadline, which is not a good thing. Um,
No.
but my editor, Colleen Bartley, is actually right on my neck with this at the moment, and we're in the process through the lockdown period. And I thought this is the thing. I thought I'd have a lot of time during lockdown, do all of that stuff. But in this room, I'm
Hmm.
I'm probably the busiest that I have been since before the project we've been working on with the Fascial Net Plastination project, because I had to leave.
I can't believe that. I can't with that and all the travel.
The difference is I'm not traveling, but I'm still able to run my courses online. So my anatomy courses I can do here as
Mm.
supplements to the weekends that the people would be missing if I'm not in the room with them. And then what we'll do when we're able to be back in front of each other again is to kind of recalibrate the entire course, because they're getting top up information this way online, so that the weekends they're scheduled in for, I can still do with them. But also all of my workshops that I was booked for, we've just converted it straight to this platform, and it works. Of course, there's some people that can't do it because they're not that tech savvy and they're not interested, they don't like
Hmm.
working that way, but they're busy. And my private sessions and all my regular classes, it's all happening here. The only thing that I can't do is the manual therapy. That's the
Yeah.
only. But with the clients I know well, and this is the thing actually, and this will kind of lead into something. Thanks for the link. Is that when I went through my structural integration training,
Hmm.
I was already a manual therapist as a cranial sacral practitioner and a shiatsu practitioner. And before even they came into my life, I was a personal trainer. And I was always used to working with someone's body and then giving them movement remedies to work with, so that they've got their kind of, if you, it's a bit like, take these pills morning, noon, and night. It's like do these exercises these times in the day and through the week, and then I'll see you in 3 weeks' time rather than next week. So you're keeping me at bay by doing the work yourself, and then we pick it up from there. So, of course,
Hmm.
when I went through the structural training, there was an element of a conversation with Tom, and this was in the late 90s, and um, someone had said to him about, oh no, it was me, because we'd run out of massage couches in the room, and I was the one that was left without the massage couch. So I
Hmm.
started doing the work on the floor, like I always did with my shiatsu. And I've always found that getting my body weight towards someone's body is so much easier by working on the floor anyway. And I said, well, I'm not too sure. Aren't we supposed to do this on the couch? I come from a shiatsu practitioner. And he walked away with a very cocky turn to the head and said, what do you think the word integration means? And I thought, okay, this is not just about structure integration. This is me integrating my practices into this.
Hmm.
So what I found when it came to me, eventually qualifying and becoming a structural integration practitioner, I was still doing the same things. I was working with my clients monthly. So a 12-session series lasted a year.
Wow.
In that year, in between each session, they had a month's worth of practice based on that line, if that's how we were working, based on what we did in that one session. They had a whole practice to go with it. And then when they came back in that month's time, we went on again to the next stage if we needed to, or recapped into the last one and carried on again. So they built their own personal practice as a movement practice to sustain the work. And they then did it for themselves, rather than me constantly doing it for them and then becoming dependent on the practitioner.
Hmm.
And that was the way that it worked. So it became movement integration with structural integration.
So, what kind of generally, what sort of people were you seeing? What sort of, were they chronic pain people? Were they people who had injuries, people who just wanted to improve their conditions? And I realize it's all over the map,
Yeah,
but did you have a
I'll say yes to all of
common denominator? Okay.
yes to all of those. I mean, given the fact that I had a studio which was at that point becoming well known as a yoga center in Brighton. So we had a lot of yoga students coming through that center. So a lot of people would come from the yoga background. But that doesn't
Hmm.
necessarily mean that they're all good movers, by the way.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
personal training clients, but also
Hmm.
word of mouth, it was coming through as well. So some people that had no movement backgrounds, but we could actually show them very simple, basic things that they could take care of for themselves. The maximum extent of the time between one session to the next was a month.
Hmm.
Some of
Wow.
it might only be 1 week, but the maximum time is a month.
Hmm.
Once they got into it, even the ones that
Hmm.
I had to do once a week.
Yeah.
Gradually extend it out and out and out.
Hmm. And see, the thing is, that's something unique that you brought to that, because with your personal training and movement background, it was much easier for you to design something
Yeah.
like that. I always give the people that I treat movement homework. They have to. There has to be. Actually, I tend to give them just one or two simple things. I try to really refine it down to, because we were talking about earlier before we started about how busy everybody is, and how difficult it can be to stay on top of the latest information.
Mm.
But we'll talk about that later. But likewise, in just normal people's lives. Oh boy, here's a bunch of things that you don't have time to do because you already don't have time to do all the other things you don't have time to do. So I try to distill it to one or two physical things that
Mm.
will reinforce the most important part of that line or that session. And then I always give them an awareness piece.
Yeah.
So, so whether, so in whatever, and it's just, the awareness piece is just about the ability to take a step back and observe yourself when you start to feel what you don't want to feel anymore,
Mm.
you know,
Mm.
and what are you doing? Where are you doing it? How are you doing it? Okay. And then see if you can make a small change and if that alters the circumstance. And then the next time it happens. So, every time I do X, I feel Y. Excuse me. They get done with the session. Hey, I don't feel Y anymore.
Yeah.
Or I don't feel X anymore, so I can do Y. Okay, great. The next time you feel X, see why and how you're doing it, and bring that information back.
Yeah.
And a lot of times they start to put it together in that intervening week or intervening 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Um, but that so your practice is much more on the self-reliance model. I shouldn't say more, but in a different way than mine is. I came to this in the 90s. I had a very successful established clinical massage therapy practice. So my whole point was to, and I'm going to use the F word here, fix you. Okay, I have this problem. I want it to be fixed. Okay, I think we can fix that. Okay, and some things are fixable. Okay, I don't have a problem with that word from a marketing standpoint. From a medical standpoint, it's a little more complicated than that. But if somebody says, "Hey, can you fix my shoulder?" They don't want you to say, "Well, I don't fix anything. I just facilitate." Okay, they've already started to not listen to you. So if somebody asks me if I can fix something, I say, "Well, tell me what needs to be fixed." I want to engage them with where they're at. So anyway, I got on my soapbox, but I had a very successful practice. And what happened is once people got the results that they wanted, they would tend to come back in every week or every 2 weeks because it felt good, because I believed that you could do effective remedial therapy and still have people feel good in the process. They didn't need to be wincing or biting the table just in order to get the results that they needed. So when I came across KMI, or as it is now, anatomy structural integration, and I went, there's an end. They quit coming in. Oh my God. Because I had a pretty healthy repeat factor in my business, even though, like I said, once the problem was resolved, it was resolved. Now, what I did love, though, was the fact that I could have three people with the same areas in their low back, and this one would be fixed or get better in 7 visits, and this one took 17 visits, and this one has been coming to me for 7.5 months, and they feel better, but they don't stay better. So this gave me an incredible framework to really begin to change that. And although it might not be, anybody I've talked to in the business world says, well, is a business model 12 and you're done or whatever isn't a great business model, but it's a great therapy model.
Yes.
And I happen to agree.
I agree with my colleague and friend Peter Blackaby, the yoga teacher and osteopath, on this, who really kind of got me much further down this route at the very beginning, in the way that he was thinking. But as for him as an osteopath, his whole route was that I actually don't want to see them again. My job is, you're almost constantly putting yourself out of business.
Yes, my job is to put me out of a job. Yeah.
That's,
Mm-hmm.
then,
And
but
I tell people that.
that person loves it so much that they pass the next person on. And I can still, in my mind, and I still have a lot of contact with my my past clients, because they eventually become students to come to movement classes because they like doing that, and they've educated themselves to understand something different about themselves. But I can track them back to the person that introduced me to them, and the person that introduced that person to them, and I've got a whole chain of people. So I'm still in touch with my very first ever client from about 30 years ago, because
That's
they're
great.
a friend, you know, and I love that. Every now and again they'll get in touch and just say, you know what, I'm doing some training stuff. Can you just help me with this? And because I know them, and this comes back to being in here again, as you were saying, because I know them, I now know what I can do with them online, even my regular now, because I know a few things I can suggest. New people during this period of time, that's not going to be that possible. Like some simple things to do, but not the detailed stuff yet. I've got to wait until we touch again.
Yeah, no, you're okay. I was gonna put a caveat in that, but you're right. The detailed stuff, not so much. But I've been surprised with new people, um, depending on their ability to express what they feel when they feel it. Some very simple self interventions can make a big difference. Until such time as we can see people again. When is that likely to happen for you? Is there any time frame on that?
Well, we're not sure. I mean, we are what, May, beginning of May now. I don't think we're going to be physically doing manual therapies on people for probably another 3 months or so to be safe.
Wow.
You know,
Wow.
just to be, because a lot of people
Mhm.
aren't going to want to come out into that environment yet. You know, a few people that are, again,
Yeah.
a colleague of mine who's a yoga teacher, that same person really. He, as an osteopath, also his demographic is a bit older. So
Mhm.
that older demographic aren't that comfortable about going back into a room again with other people.
Yeah.
So immediately that's changed for quite a period of time.
Well, I have a start date of exactly 2 weeks from now,
Wow.
May 19th. May 19th. My department is reopening. So for those of you, for those of you who don't know me, I practice at the Center for Integrative Medicine at UPMC, which stands for the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. And I have never been so happy in my life. About almost 12 years ago now, I aligned myself with big medicine because that's where I wanted to create change. And I had the opportunity to walk through the door, and it was not easy for myriad reasons, but they opened the door to me and I walked through. And what's great is, we have an infection and disease department. We have an infrastructure that comes in and says, okay, what is it that you want to be doing? And we deal with a lot of people who are in, chronic, severe, acute pain. We also deal with a lot of immunocompromised people. So we have things like me and yoga and acupuncture and chiropractic and different forms of psychotherapy and EMDR and prolotherapy. That's the kind of stuff that we do at the Center for Integrative Medicine. I think acupuncture, if I didn't mention it, is a big component. So once we've been deemed medically necessary, who do we need to exclude by reason of age or reason of immunocompromise? And what are the protocols we're putting in place to keep everybody safe? So I felt very confident going into this that by the time we would be coming out of it, I would feel comfortable going into work, but people, more importantly, would feel confident coming in to see me because they know that we would have, for example, we had quarantine procedures in place by late February if somebody came into the office who, seemed to have a visible fever or was coughing or had been out of the, like if they were ticking the boxes, we had something to do to isolate them in a space that could then be completely disinfected when they left. So we're really on top of it. What's interesting is, will we have to wear a gown? Will we have to wear gloves? What are those things going to be? I know that they want to keep lobby traffic to a minimum. So the procedure is going to be now when you show up for your appointment, and I'm in an outbuilding from the one hospital that I'm attached to, so it's maybe 6 floors with its own parking. You show up, you text or you call in and say, I'm here to see so and so, and they'll say, okay, he's ready, or please wait, we'll call you back.
Mm.
So as soon as they know that my previous patient is gone and I've disinfected all the surfaces and taken the extra time I'm going to need to take between people, then they say, okay, you can come in. And then we don't know yet if they're going to get their temperature taken at the door before they even enter the building. We'll know that by the end of the week. I kind of think maybe that's going to be one of the procedures. But then once they come into our office, there's going to be a checklist questionnaire about symptoms and travel and such. And then they get cleared to come through so that we keep all the contact to an absolute minimum. So now needless to say, I am going to have to be shortening the number of people I can see in one day because I'm going to need extra time to do all this. And it's going to be weird. I'm looking forward to going back, but I have a little anxiety about it too. You know?
No, I mean, because we're in London, I mean, you know, I'm split between London and Brighton, and this is our London home, with the studio here in the garden. But you know, a lot of my work has been in Brighton. I've still got a place down there that I teach from, which is, you know, our place that we own. But you know, I'm so used to it, interacting with people face to face all the time, you know, like you, with workshops and courses and lectures and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it is in London, it's been a different quality to the feel of the lockdown, so that not many people are around each other in the streets and stuff like that. You know, it's treating another human being as if they're diseased is a really strange behavior. You know, walking around them, giving them wide berth all of the time. You know, in supermarkets, people step away. I mean, you know, I'm always a sociable person. I love hugging and stuff like that. So to be in a supermarket, not that I hug strangers in supermarkets, but
okay, I was going to go there. So
I get you to it. But,
there are police reports. I understand.
Wide berth and walk around. First of all, I'm sort of sniffing my armpits, but realizing, of course, the reason everyone's doing that, we're all doing the same thing. And it seemed quite weird. So to reach out and touch again, other than my wife, you know, to work that way with tissues. I also think there's going to be an interesting feeling around that again once it happens for the first time after a long time of not doing it. Be like learning the tissues all over again.
Well, I can speak to that in a couple of ways. So I actually had a patient that I saw during and we're on what's called a stay-at-home order, which is basically don't go out unless it's absolutely necessary. Like you have to go to the grocery store and get food. You have to go to the hardware store and get something because there was a storm and a tree branch broke your window. I mean, you know, things that are necessary to keep your life safe and sustainable. The pharmacy, doctor's appointments that are medically necessary. And like I said, but I had a patient reach out to me who is a respiratory therapist, and she had a particularly pernicious chronic condition that had been bird dogging her for about 10 years, and we made incredible progress in about 3 months or so. I mean, to the point where, okay, come back in a month, you know. But she took a fall. And also you add the stress of what we're living under. And she lives in a slightly more rural area, about 90 minutes from me. And she reached out to me and said, is there any way, because I just really feel everything's starting to come back. And I thought, okay, here's a responsible person who understands safety and protocols. I feel comfortable seeing with you under these conditions. She had a mask, I had a mask. I mean, we took all the precautions, but I also know she was doing best practices when she's outside the home because that was part of her day-to-day routine. Other people, you don't know. I was in, so, you know, she came and we did what we needed to do. And afterwards, you know, I took my clothes off and took a shower.
Yeah.
You know, and that's one of the things they're saying in my department now is that, you know, I won't, you know, I tend to wear shirts like this. I tend to dress kind of nicely around the office. I'll probably be wearing something much more akin to scrubs and changing out of them when I'm done and putting new clothes on in to go home, and then those go right in the bin
Yeah.
when I get home. Just simple things like that that I'm going to have to get used to, because I don't want to bring something. I don't want to bring something back to my house and infect the people that I live with.
Okay.
But the other thing I will say is that I was worried, was it going to be weird? And it wasn't weird. It was
Mm.
like, this feels like home. This feels like, okay. It's like, okay, I didn't lose anything by not practicing. I mean, it felt a little strange because I hadn't done it in almost a month,
Mm.
and and to be that last but a few minutes. Now, on the other side of that, I was in a supermarket, and this is again maybe around that same 3 4 weeks ago. So things were uh, the person, the cashier doing the checking, wasn't wearing gloves, and it was all I could do not to freak out and freak out on her for not wearing gloves, you know. And I realized just how on edge I myself was with what's responsible, what isn't. And I don't know, it seems like, and hey, here's to Boris Johnson surviving. Uh, but it seems like you've got much more coherent nationwide leadership in your country than we've gotten in ours.
Okay.
I don't know if that's true, but that's what I observe from the outside. I don't know if that's
Kind of
true.
worms, really. So we won't get into that one. But I think there's a lot more common sense with how people are trying to behave. But not speak for everyone. But
Uh-huh.
yeah, it's yeah, it's a big subject. I don't think we'll need to. The interesting thing
not
around
not for this webinar, boys
Right,
and
right.
girls.
So, given the fact that touch is a big part of our practices, and now no touch is happening, it's so needed. But yet, there's a level of touch because people are in touch with each other through processes like this. I mean, the ones that really care about that are in touch with each other a lot. There's a lot more communication with family members around lots of people that don't normally have that level of contact with friends are now sort of turning to this to do this. And
Hmm.
I'm finding with the classes that I run and I'm teaching breath sessions in the mornings and with a combination of qigong and yoga involved in that. But people don't want to leave at the end. They were talking to each other, they're
Nice.
more about that, so a little thing that we sometimes try to introduce is give yourself a hug at the end of it, and everyone's kind of there hugging themselves at
Hmm.
the end of it, and you just see a whole group of people just giving themselves a hug, and it's a nice way to kind of feel that there is a connection in that respect.
Yeah, yeah. I love myself. I love baths,
Mm.
because then that's it's not the same thing as touch, but I'm immersed in the water, and the water is touching me.
Yeah,
And I like them in general principles, but I find something more deeply reassuring
yeah,
about them at this point in time.
that's really
Plus, that's where it's a great place. It's a great place to read research.
yeah.
Uh,
About that, you've what how did your book come together, David? What was the thing that kind of had you spark off this kind of idea? Was it something you were working on before you got approached by Handspring? Did you approach them? How did this come about with your
oh,
Oh,
thereby.
I love the story about how the name of the book came about, so you must divulge that one as well.
Okay, okay. This is a tale. This is a tale. So, and I always wanted to write a book. So and moreover, I thought I had the skill set to be able to write a book.
Mm.
So some people, yes, this is my first book, and but I've been writing all my life. I want to be really, really clear on that, because I get many wonderful compliments about the actual writing style of the book, and I'm grateful to all of you, because being informative is great, but it's even more important to be effective.
Yes.
So I can have all this information, but if I can't communicate it effectively, it doesn't do you any good. So I want to thank you for all that. That was really reassuring, and that gives me more faith and confidence moving forward into my future writing projects. So I've been writing in one form or another, whether it was letters to pen pals, writing copy when I worked in a television station, writing song lyrics for most of my life in one way or the other. Um, and I think what I recognized was that there was this deep need for a book like my book that says that anybody could read and understand.
Mm.
And that is in no way meant to be a belittlement to many of the fine books that are out there, but they're written for a specific audience. So for example, how you and I are conversing is not necessarily the same way that I would talk about this thing to a room full of physicians. Or if I was working with a room full of manual therapists versus a room full of yoga teachers, um, I might vary how I present the information and even the vocabulary with which I present the information to make a better connection, to be more effective. So that matters. And I had been dreaming about a book like this because it just wasn't out there. And I understand the rigorousness and the thoroughness that some of these other books that were keys to my own scientific foundation, that they needed to be written that way. But I felt there needed to be something that came in for that a typical therapist or a typical yoga bodywork teacher, anybody, personal trainer, uh, physical therapist that could say, "Oh, I get it now." I had a nemesis, one of many at the hospital, by the name of David Stone. Here's looking at you, David. And he was a physical medicine and rehabilitation doctor with a passion for sports medicine. And he's like, "I don't get this fascist stuff." So I gave him Carlos Stecco's book. I lent him this book. He's like, "All they're doing is talking about Dupuytren's." You know how many times I see Dupuytren's? Zero. I mean, why are they always going on about Dupuytren's? Well, it's very big in Germany. A lot of his researchers are from Germany. But when people that I should have been connecting with, who were saying, "Well, look, you got through the gate, and you have to understand, 12 years ago, to get through the gate and not having a conventional degree in any way, shape, or form, they even the people that have to vet me to let me through the gate, they even called Tom Myers and talked to Tom Myers as somebody who was on my list of people that I learned from. I mean, it was it's about a 6 to 9 month process, or at least it was back then, to get through the gate. So the fact that you got through the gate kind of gave you a little bit of, like strutting credibility, but you can still have some extreme differences with people say, "Okay, you made it this far, but I still don't understand what you know or why any of it matters."
Mm.
And that was very frustrating. So that said to me, okay, I understand what these books are about, but they're not being effective to the people that I most want to influence. At the same time, I'm lecturing around the hospital, and an osteopath who was in an administrative position, he was also an MD and an osteo, kind of took me under his wing and said, "Come here, boy, we have a lot to talk about." And so it was gelling in my head even more strongly that we needed a book like this, because Anatomy Trains wasn't doing it. Carlos Stecco's book wasn't doing it, at least not in my world. It wasn't making the impact that I thought it should be making. And that's no slam to those very fine books. So I also had been in the situation where I'd been going to all the summer schools. I'd been doing all the science. Thank you, Robert Schleip, for really insisting I come to that first summer school, and then eventually allowing me to start working behind the scenes and putting together about 80 to 100 video presentations over a 10-year period, 6 to 7 year period, where it wasn't enough to just put these things out on video, but to integrate, to go back to your word, Gary, to integrate the slides into the presentations, to put little arrows pointing to the information in the slides in the right point. I would spend hours editing a 45-minute video that essentially was just one person standing there talking. So I began to really absorb over years, over and over again, and going, okay, that's what this means. And then talking to my patients about it, and talking to these other physicians about it, and giving lectures about it at the different hospitals, and then going, okay, I understand that now.
Yeah.
So I had a half a dozen years of distilling this complicated information into some coherent talking points that physicians were okay with,
So basically,
and it was,
a degree in fascia.
well, yeah, yeah. And that's what the osteopath said. He looked at my CV and he said, um, you don't have a degree, but you do have a degree looking at everything that you've done. It's just not a conventional one. You asked me how I came to write the book. I think I'm going the long way around in this story. Um, so it had been sitting there and it had been percolating for a long time, that this book was necessary. And I got involved selling handspring books through my website where I sold my educational videos. And I was having a conversation with them, and basically it was just one of those things that fell out of the sky and into my lap.
Mm.
And I always talk about it that way, but I should dial it back slightly from there. But basically they said, "Wow, we've been looking for a book like this, and nobody's been able to write it. Do you think you could write this book?" And that happened over a Skype call, which was great because I was able to just say very cool and be like, "Oh, tell me more. How does that work?" Because in the inside, I'm alternately terrified and screaming and jumping 10 feet in the air, going, "Yeah, oh my God!" All at once. But I'm able to go, "All right, tell me more." Now, for 2 years prior to that, I had a blog called Fascial Connections.
I remember that.
So, wow, thank you. So that was sort of my daily calisthenics. That was my daily practice of writing about fascia. And I realized that to make it sustainable, I couldn't be sitting there writing something original every day. Like, oh, here's my amazing thoughts for today. And I one, I don't have the time for that. And two, I'd be making too much stuff up. So let me just let me post things that are of interest to me, because if they're of interest to me, then they'll be of interest to other people. And I would spend Mondays writing a week's worth of posts or
Right.
links, and and I started to develop a format. And some things would take longer form writing, some things would be shorter form. I mean, but it was good practice to be able to communicate in a different way. And I don't know if Handspring ever saw that blog. I know that Robert Schleip was a big fan of the blog, and in that. And when I presented my proposal to Handspring, one of the feedback that they got from Tracy, Tracy Malore,
Mhm.
was she's like, because I submitted a sample of my technical medical writing, and she said, "I'm rather disappointed. I thought it would be more like his blog.
Interesting.
If he's going to write this book, it needs to be more like his blog." And thank you for that. So I think maybe Handspring had maybe peeked under the hood and knew that I had put that blog out there, and said, "Okay, he can write." Um, and and then became the hard process of trying to figure out the outline,
Right. Okay.
because I knew I could write it, but how do I organize the information? Just like somebody comes into you and says, "I have these physical problems and I'm here at point A. How do I get to the end of it?" And you start thinking, okay, how am I going to take them step by step to get them the result that they want? How am I going to take the reader step by step to give them the specifics of the information, but the gestalt of the information? And that took about 2 months
Right.
to really. And I want to say it came to me in a dream. It came to me in the middle of a session. I had my hands on somebody, and I believe I was doing neck work, suboccipitals, and I was in the zone. I was in that space. And those of you who do fascial body work know there can be a deeply meditative component to it,
Yeah.
and that's a wonderful space to be in. And your person's in that space, you're in that space, and your brain just kind of just things are just out there. You're focused here, and it's almost like it's almost meditation, and the thoughts travel, and they kind of come and go. They don't stick. You don't get obsessed about things. If you do, you kind of recenter and move on. But anyway, in the middle of it, this outline just started building itself in my head.
Mm.
I am absolutely, like, completely real to you. Oh, chapter one needs to be about these elements. Here's what goes into chapter one. oh, then chapter 2 would be about that. And then there would be these elements, and that would lead you to chapter 3. And it just started building it myself. And because being in the hospital, we people keep patient notes, client records the way they do, but we have certain forms we have to fill out. So I said, excuse me for a minute, I need to put something in your chart. And I went and I grabbed her medical chart off the desk, and I just started sketching out what my brain was telling me, because I knew that if I didn't start to get it down, it would be gone.
Exactly.
And I thought, okay, maybe that means I'm 5 minutes late because I don't want to jip them out of what they need in the session, but I need to stop for a minute and write this down before it goes away. And the outline did really, and then as soon as I actually had a break, I had those few notes, I was able to, and other than moving one chapter from position 3 to position 2, I think I had anatomy first and tensegrity third. I moved tensegrity to second and anatomy to third. The outline did not change.
Mm.
You know, I filled in some of the colors a bit more from that moment.
Right.
So that was a matter of seizing the moment when it came. And the other thing that you mentioned was when I told my partner Coletta, we've been together 26 years now in June, that I was going to write this book. And she said, well, if you're going to write a book about fascia, because she has lived with me for the last 20 years with all this stuff, she said, if you're going to write a book about fascia, you better say what it is and why it matters. And I said, okay, I'm writing that down. And that became the working title of the book for my proposal. And we never came up with a better title, because there it is right in the title.
Yeah.
So, you know, hats off to her. And I don't know what I'm going to call the second edition, Why Fascia Still Matters. Actually, it's crazy. I'm already thinking about the second edition of that, because there's so much new information that's come in since that book got published.
You know, it's interesting, you know, you're talking about that process of the book. That was a similar thing for me about, you know, I've been working on these particular structures, which you've seen in, and I presented that in Leipzig as well, you know, the outline of that idea. And it was something that I saw in my mind, and I'd seen it with so many people when I was working with them. And then it was just something I saw, I think, in a book. The whole process of seeing differently, I think, is something that is kind of unique, I think, in the structural integration world as well. So that's certain individuals, and have been educators to us, that definitely have a view of the world from a totally different perspective. And, you know, looking at the quality of the body from a different perspective. I come, as you know, from a graphics background, and, you know, my life was about looking at things differently, you know, and I was also grew up, as you know, in the kind of the punk era, so we'd think differently. And in the body, you know, in the bodybuilding world, we would look at things differently in terms of how we needed to understand balance of the body. So if we wanted to, here's a toy, but if you wanted to body read something like that, when we were looking at bodies, we would actually look at it upside down in the photographs, and they look so different. So in my body reading practices, I get people to look between their knees to look at someone, because they see them upside down. Then you see something completely different when you see it upside down. And it's just something I was looking at in an image, which was, I think, an old Vesalius image or something like that. And I just took the page and did that. And I thought, oh, okay, I've had a hunch on this, and now I can see it from that perspective. I'm going to see if I can go and find that when I'm next in the lab. And it kind of born out of some work I did with Todd Garcia in Vienna, and I think it was about 2005 or 6 when I first started working with those sort of dissections. And it just carried on from there. And it was Todd that said, you know, you've actually got something here. Just keep repeating it until you can't repeat it anymore. You know, find it again and again and again. And that's what I did. You know, I spent a long time. But not only did I find the one, there's about 7 sort of structures that I found that way, and it's all leg related. And I'm sort of taking it off into different parts of the body that these are myofascial things. But it just came in a moment where I thought, oh, I know how to lay this out in a book now. And that's what I've done. So the framework's all there. Most of it's written. We've got the images and dissections and the photographs and the drawings and all that kind of stuff. It's interesting how it just comes in a moment of nothing.
Well, you have to have it published before I do the second edition of Fascia, What It Is and Why It Matters, so I can finally put you in the anatomy chapter.
Yes. Okay, that'd be great. I'd love to do that.
Yeah, that was one of my great regrets, was that we weren't able to include you in the original draft of my book. Gary's ideas were in it, but they had not been previously published, and it was an interesting argument because I kept pushing to keep you included, and it was finally one of the big editors there said, everything that is in your book has a reference except this. And you were so scrupulous about documenting the science, and if these were your theories, your hypothesis, because it's your book, then okay, but they're not. So you have all this stuff that's been appropriately vetted and people who know what they're saying have blessed it, except that.
Yeah,
and when they framed it that way, I said, okay, that I understand that argument. And you were so gracious about understanding, because I was just like, oh man, I'm gonna let you down.
No,
You know.
yeah, I get it, because there is, and the thing that I really love about you and respect highly about you is the detail that you're scrupulous with as well. And just the conversation before we've done this is that the details and the way that you borrow and find things and dig out this research is like that's quite remarkable, the way that you can find it, and you also make sense of it. This is the thing, and you're able to describe things to me in such a way that's like, I got that. You made it understandable. Where some of the science text for a lot of people is not understandable. It takes a lot of figuring out.
Their academic writing is its own language. It can be very chewy, and they also, it's a very timid kind of writing, particularly when there aren't maths involved. I mean, so like the language of science is math. And I don't know how we apply mathematics to the human body as such. Like we can with astrophysics. We can use math to determine the orbit of a planet. We were able to use Newton's laws to determine that there was no planet Vulcan, of a planet that was actually closer to the sun than Mercury. Because of the oddities in Mercury's orbit, where it appears to go one way and then go another way. They were able to predict where a planet might be using math and then find it years later. The body is mathematically predictable, as opposed to, say, my study of astronomy and astrophysics is. So that's number one. There's an aspect to medicine that is more of an art. I have this book. Oh, where did it go? Yeah, I want to say it's called The Art of Medicine. But there's another good one that I highly recommend. Complications by Atul Gawande. Okay. So one of the things, there's books that you read for information, and then there's books that you read because they're just damn good reads. This is both. And Atul Gawande is the kind of surgeon that you want, because he writes very clear about the first time he used a scalpel and cut somebody open, he felt this thrill. Like, whoa, man, yeah, this is the thing for me. And it's like, yeah, okay, you want somebody who's into it. I get that. Exactly. But the subtitle is A Surgeon's Notes on an Imperfect Science.
Very interesting.
And
that's really interesting.
The book comes in 3 sections. The first section is called Fallibility. The second section is called Mystery. And the third section is called Uncertainty. Okay? And it takes you through his career. Yeah, it is us. And it's like, if I was teaching structural integration, this would be one of the core texts of the book, because all you have to do is take out all the surgery stuff and put in all the plug in our jargon and our nomenclature, and you realize it's no different. There are certain rules and principles that work most of the times, but you still have to do it. He talks about how long it took for him to do his first cardiac catheter, and now he can do it without thinking. The first time I had to stick my finger in somebody's mouth, and how much time I took on that session. Now it's like, oh, okay, fine, whatever. You know, 5 minutes later, we're done. Yeah, I wasn't going to bring up the nose point. But I'll tell you this, something I'm thinking about. I'm just going to put this out there because I know there's going to be clinicians who are listening. And so I'm lucky I have a medical supervisor who is ostensibly in charge of my department. He hires competent people and then lets them do their jobs. He's brilliant that way if you're going to have a boss. And he's got your back. That's what you want. But I'm talking with him now about how am I to do these, because I had suspended doing back in the beginning of March when I realized, okay, I should be sticking my hand in anybody's mouth right now, even if they're coming into me with a condition that requires it. But I used to work in a funeral home, and I worked at a funeral home in the Miami area during the AIDS crisis. And I thought, well, what did we do then? We double gloved.
Yeah.
Because then if one fails, you've got a backup. And so I've said, are you okay? Is there going to be a problem here if I still do those procedures, but I just double glove? And he hasn't given me an answer, but if he was going to say no, I would have heard that really quickly. I know how that works.
Yeah.
So that's my recommendation. If you really need it, just double glove.
Double glove, yeah. You need to use masks and stuff like that for you, but double gloving would probably be a wise move. That was something we do in labs a lot, is double glove anyway, in dissection. Anyway, go on, carry on. Sorry, I interrupted.
What was I carrying on about? The art of medicine, mystery, uncertainty.
Well, what I was going to head towards really is that you've trained in the stretch therapy.
Fascial stretch therapy, Chris and Ann Frederick Stretch to Win. Yeah.
So, how has that really informed your work as well?
Well, back when I was a clinical massage therapist, I had some really great fundamental training in a variety of modalities and techniques. So what we would do in that particular school was we would work regionally. So we would spend a day studying the anatomy of, and I think we started, basically the idea was we were going to spend these weekend intensives. So let's start with the conditions most people come in with. Low back pain, okay. Neck and shoulder pain, okay. Then this, then that, then the other. So that we were applying things more specifically to, if not diagnoses, chronic conditions. And then we would study a half a dozen different approaches to that same area, informed by the anatomy on a regional level. So one of them was PNF stretches.
Okay.
So, and I found those to be incredibly effective. So the fascial stretch therapy has a very strong PNF component.
Right.
But when you add the traction in the leverage things that they do in with that PNF component, it was a very easy fit for me to kind of go back to that, because I didn't use PNF so much anymore in my structural integration practice. But there were a few moves that I found that just always worked really well that I would incorporate into them. And I would do some assisted stretching as necessary, but that kind of brought that all back home to me in a way that's really effective. And I find that I incorporate it more into my SI framework than I do standalone fascial stretch therapy sessions. Though I would like to finish, I'd like to finish the other levels in their training and see how sophisticated they get it from the base core. And I find that there are places where, and I should take it back to 2010. I was on a train to the first fascia summer school with Chris and Ann Frederick. We all met up. I mean, I didn't know them. They didn't know me. We'd gotten off an all-night flight. I got locked in the train bathroom. It was very funny. Ask Chris Frederick to tell you the story. He tells it much better than I can. So anyway, we had a great laugh on the train. But Robert was Schleight. Robert was running the fascia summer school, and he had slots for people to do presentations. So there was all the rock stars were there, but he had these open hours where you could have 3 people an hour get up and do 15 to 20 minutes about their deal, which was incredibly generous. So Chris and Ann were going to do a demonstration of fascial stretch therapy, and I don't know if I volunteered or if I managed to charm my way into being pre-selected to being the person on the table. So I had Anne Frederick do me one good while Chris was explaining what she was doing. And I got up off that table and it was like, I need that. I need to learn what that is. That does things I can't do with my hands.
Yeah.
What is that? Sorry, I'm doing this. So my body needed, where's the Kim? My body needed that. I need to learn this as fast as possible because it does things that I can't do with my hands. And when you find that, it's so rare. It's like, okay, that was cool. I'm glad I took that workshop, or that gives me an interesting new angle on it. But when you have that explosion of all three at once, but it took me quite a long time to actually get to the point where I took one of their trainings. But it was that much of a life-changing moment. Like, man, I just felt like everything was moving, everything was lubricated and greased and moving like I hadn't felt in a long time, and in a way that I never felt from SI type work.
Well,
and Chris and Ian also, they took the KMI training, so they've got that in their back pocket too.
I think, yeah, I mean, you know, in my mind, it would be really essential for if you've got, you know, a movement kind of practice and maybe a stretch-based practice, if that's the right words for it, to understand the manual component as well, you know, because that information, once it comes in through these, there's a whole new that kind of comes up, and you know, the whole picture just becomes much more three-dimensional, you know. And I think movement and manual therapies, you know, the manual therapist would need to be trained in the future as a movement practitioner and therapist as well, or at least have their own movement practice going on for their own body.
No, you absolutely need that. Mine is tremendously yoga based, always has been. But you key on something that to me is really important. I think it's the combination. So you can, you know, if you go and get good manual therapy, you're going to know where your there is. You're going to have a different understanding and awareness of the there place that you then will have a different experience of when you go into your movement therapy, or whatever it is. I mean, I remember somebody I've seen last year coming in saying, well, I came to see you about my shoulder because I've been doing Pilates for 2 years, but my shoulder isn't any better. And I thought, but I didn't say out loud, well, why did you think Pilates was going to fix your shoulder? But, you know, if you're a good practitioner, you hold that question in your mind, but you don't ask it that way because that's going to put them on a defensive position to make them feel like they did something wrong. And your most important thing in that first time that you meet somebody is to earn their trust and give them a win. If you do that, they're going to come back, and hopefully you're going to get them where they need to go. So, but it's a good question to hold. Do you see that sometimes where people approach Pilates or yoga, or even resistance training, thinking it's going to, let's just say for conventional purposes, fix a defect, and that's really not the appropriate thing?
No, exactly.
And how do you handle that?
Exactly, and the methodology of those practices weren't to fix in the first place. You know, they weren't coming from a fix the body process. I mean, even Joseph Pilates' work was about maintaining just an integration of the body. You could say it was just another form of structure integration, one way or the other, to have a body work well within the field of gravity. You know, the same, you know, yoga, we could say that is an aspect of it as well. But one thing that I say to my students is that, you know, don't think that, you know, if you're a yoga teacher and you're really passionate about that and you've spent a life reading the books, you've got the t-shirts, you've got every possible mat you can get, you've lived in India, you've studied in India, all that kind of stuff, is that don't think that the practice is just the only thing. There's going to be other things that you may need along the way that are going to support it. You know, you're going to need some kind of manual therapy here and there because things happen to the body. Maybe the practice generates a preventative.
Hmm.
You know, I mean, I see this with
Hmm.
my father. You know, him maintaining a discipline, which is his athletics, and he trains a certain way, and it's the same methodology he's always ever used since a teenager, and there he is at 82, and he's just refining his practice. But every now and again, he might just do something, and there's an injury, so he needs someone's hands on him. You know, his going to the practice the same way isn't always going to save that from happening. You know,
No.
someone that might have the best beautiful practice in the world, that they think it's the healthiest thing, and then they trip down the step and then they sprain their ankle. You know, the practice
Yeah.
didn't save them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
And
going to throw this in there. This is a conversation, very brief conversation I had with Vladimir.
sorry.
This is
I thought
whether
you were saying our conversation was
I
great.
like not to say this, but
Go for it.
he came back from a particular event and he just looked at me as we were walking down one of these outdoor corridors at the Planetarium, and I said, "So, what did you think of that then?" And he said, "Well, you know, being a clinical anatomist as well, and I've been involved in surgery, I understand the fascia. We have to contend with that every time that we're doing our plastination dissections." He said, "But if someone here right now has got some kind of heart failure, I don't think treating the fascia is going to save them." And I just thought, well, I think you kind of bang on with that one. You know, if I start
Yeah. Yeah.
manual therapy on you whilst you're having a heart attack,
Hmm.
that's not really going to work. Now, you know, maybe certain acupuncture techniques and shiatsu techniques might delay the process, but I don't
Hmm.
think a fascial or a fascial type work is going to save it. And I something that we look at in dissection, and you've seen this with the fascial arter piece that we did for the exhibit in Berlin, is that the moment we took the fascial artery away from the thigh, that fascial artery became quite vulnerable. Lots of movement and moving and handling that tissue, things were happening. It was breaking up, holes were appearing. But it was the
Hmm.
moment it was removed from its underlying structures that it was part of. So the integration of everything is absolutely,
So it lost some of its resilience
totally,
because it was taken out of context.
totally. Doesn't
That's a metaphor for life. That's a metaphor for life, boys and girls. And you heard it right from Gary. Um, I wanted to bring it back around to something, since we're kind of like old war stories with Gary and David. But one of the best things I did early on is I shifted to becoming a fascia specialist, as they call me around the department. Um, in left massage therapy world was there was a yoga teacher that I was particularly admiring of, and she was very 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 good, and I really wanted to work with her. I wanted to get her in my room, because I knew I would learn a lot. So I worked out a deal where basically she did a session with me. I did a private one-on-one yoga session with her, and that was one of the best barters I ever made in my career.
mm,
Because I mean, and this was not like a back-to-back thing. I want to be really clear about that. I would go to her yoga studio. She would come to my office. I would focus on her, and because she was able to go places and do things with her body that most of the people I was seeing at the time, and this is before I was at the hospital. This was like early 2000s. Um, so, you know, my palpation skills, my assessment, trying to get somebody's psoas or transversus abdominis attachments can be like trying to start an old car that's been sitting outside in 0-degree weather for 2 weeks. Whereas somebody who's used to working with and moving that, it's a very different experience. It's like working on an old Ford or tuning up a Ferrari. So once you get your hands on a Ferrari and you really, and it's the same basic parts from an anatomical standpoint, but it really upped my game in terms of seeing what was possible, being able to differentiate and distinguish micro movements, and then for me, because I'd always been a fan of yoga, I'd always done it off and on, but being able to walk in and have her give me that experience, I'm going to use that word that's really trendy right now, embodiment. Okay. I was doing embodiment back in 2004. That's what a badass I am. So, but being able to really translate that in my body, I can remember being in Warrior One, and she said, "Now I want you to breathe, and I want you to start the breath from the sole of your foot." And my brain went, "Okay, diaphragm, deep front line. Okay, there's a connection into the deep posterior compartment and Tom, Dick, and Harry. Okay, that makes sense to my anatomical brain. Let's see if I can really do that." So in that moment, I imagined that I was using the dome of the arch of my foot to connect with the dome of my diaphragm and everything in between.
Mm.
You know, in that moment, the light in the room, everything is so distinctive of that moment of that, okay, there's what that is.
Yeah.
Or the day I walked in and I was just tired. I was just tired. And she said, "So what do you want to do today?" And I said, "Donna, I'm so tired. I want to do 90 minutes of Shavasana." And she's like, "Great, we are going to work your ass today." And I got to see what the physiological change was
Yeah.
by working with somebody who knew me, what I was capable of, but also understood when to push, how much to push, and when not to push too much. You know, so that what that did for me in terms of that whole, you know, you need both perspective was huge. So anybody, anybody who's doing manual therapy needs a good movement practice. And I know that we know people who don't have that. And we also know good movement people who don't get any manual therapy,
Yeah.
and they should.
I think key in every time I've had manual therapy, I've learned about myself in such an intriguing way. And we know, of course, a lot of people don't necessarily think that way. They don't want to. But I think being a practitioner of the body, one way or the other, is that to receive that kind of treatment, even though I let's say I have an injury and I go and see my colleague Peter Blackerby, who's one of the finest osteopaths I know, and I trust him with my body, and he's done that for years. But every time there's an educational dialogue with his hands and my body that I'm tracking internally.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can go away and work with that. So he knows that, I would have the session with him. I might not need to see him for another year. And then I would just work with the work, and just carry on with things, and it's, yeah. But can we generate that environment for our students or our clients if they're interested enough? I can't impose that on them.
Yeah, and how do we do it? How do we do it without being too precious?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's something that I don't have a lot of patience for. At the same time, I don't want to shut anybody down from having a meaningful experience. You know, and so how do we balance and present these things in a way? I'll go back to complications here. That what I love about that book, and this is one of those books I reread every couple of years because there's always something more to pull out of it. And it's just beautifully written. But there is that, this surgeon has his medical and scientific knowledge that he then puts into practice, that he leverages into experience, that allows him sometimes to make intuitive leaps and know what to do because we need a decision now. Unfortunately, you and I can be a little more relaxed in that way. It's, when this whole COVID-19 thing started and I was sitting with what to do, I had already been knowing that I needed to change how I practiced. But before we had a lot of information, and I said, you know what, until I'm told otherwise, I'm not medically necessary, because you know what, nobody's going to have a heart attack and die if they don't see me. Just like you were talking about earlier, it's like, am I important? Yes. Am I absolutely necessary right now? Not so much.
Yes.
And I'm okay with that.
That's a really good point, because, at what point is this work important? When? At what stage? That's a really great place. Where does it get referenced and framed as the important point?
Yeah. And and so here's an example of the exception proves the rule. I was contacted by a patient of mine who is a medical professional who had been working I've been working with for a bird-doggingly chronic problem um, that was affecting their capacity to be effective. And a fascinating story. We don't have time to get into the nitty gritty of it, but long story bearable. She had been getting good sustained results where it's like, come back in a month, come back in 5 weeks. Well, I saw her right before we shut everything down, which was really good. But this person contacted me recently and said, I had a fall. Things were starting to flare up again, I think, just from the tension. But then I had a fall, and now it's really bad again. And I'm just really worried that it's going to make me less effective. And I need to be effective right now because of the medical function this person is performing. And I thought, well, okay, here's somebody who's going to be who normally uses best practices in terms of being scrupulous about their hygiene. And now they're doing it even more so. So number one, I trust them. Number two, we've worked together long enough. They know their body, I know their body, and they know what makes them more effective and what doesn't. So under those circumstances, all right, yeah, I'm necessary here, because also their being more effective is going to affect other people, or their ability to be less effective could have a deleterious effect. So how you split that difference can't change.
It's actually, hearing you say that, is that we are important at a certain point in each person's life or development, if they're our client. But that reference point of where the importance is, it sits as a different place in each individual's life relative to where it would sit on that medical timeline.
Yeah. And let's take it one step beyond. I'm thinking about another patient I saw, a real favorite of mine, and this person was in the clergy, and it was really interesting because they had some very serious physical issues, and they came in with some physical conditions that were not treatable by me. Not that they weren't treatable, but they were in the category of, that's not something I can treat, but this other stuff I can. But they also, because of their function in life, they brought their emotional life into it. They brought their spiritual life into it. Now, this person had a psychotherapist. This person had a spiritual counselor that they related to as a member of clergy, just because we all need someone to talk to about things. But they were willing to bring that into the room as part of their whole body, their holisticness. So these were incredibly rich sessions. And this was somebody who took, they were at the longer end of the spectrum in terms of numbers of treatments, just because they had more physical conditions in the way of getting effective results. So some one step up and two steps back and such. But we got to a point where from my perspective, I was ready to release them and say, okay, we're done. But I also realized that I had become part of their support network, and even though and that there was an aspect, there was a dimension to the work that we were doing that for them enhanced their overall well-being beyond just the physical. And it's like, can we get that pelvis a little more neutral? Well, come back in 3 months. Let's give the half-life to the half-life of the collagen network and see what happens. But I didn't want to pull the rug out from under them.
No.
And I've seen that happen where people, when you're excited because they're getting ready to, you're getting ready to tell them, hey, we don't have to come in so often, and they're blindsided by it. You got to be careful with some people. And I told them, I said, look, I realize I'm part of your support network, and I really respect, and I'm that's an honor that I'm part of your support network. And if you feel you need to come in, then I want you to come in, and whether that's every week or every other week or every third week, that's your choice. From my perspective, I think we've reached the limit of what I think we can do for a while, and a break is okay. But if you feel you need to come in because it's helping you, you come in, but you tell me what we're going to work on or where we're going to work. Okay. So it's totally up to you. How I do it is up to me, but what we do is up to you. And that worked for her because it was one of those things where if I said, okay, we're done, it would have been like pulling that rug out. And she needed that rug for a little bit longer.
And that's important because they feel really listened to as well, you know, and that's a dance. And I love that dance with clients sometimes. It's such a
Yes,
beautiful journey, and it's personal, you know,
it's very personal.
it's, and it's, I think the fact that someone lets you into their life that way is such a privilege, and then that's important. And they've invested a lot of
Hmm.
trust. You have trust with them.
Yeah,
And there's that
yeah.
whole, you know, client, patient, and practitioner safety
Hmm.
stuff like that. But
Yeah.
you know, I would, you know, at times when I had my center in Brighton, I was seeing it's like 10 clients a day sometimes and stuff like that. So you get to the end of a day and you realize that it's draining and invigorating, but it's a different kind of let go at the end of the day. And I realized I've just
Hmm.
experienced 10 lifetimes today.
Yes, yes.
I've been through their life, each one with them, and no wonder I've just lived 10
Hmm.
times. You know?
I'm going to share something here. One of my favorite things, and I learned this from Tom Finley, who's not, which really surprised me because he's not the person I would expect to say this. But I have a cup in my office. It's on my shelf. It's a more of like a pottery chalice with a tree on it, and it's just sitting over there, minding its own business. But it's a reminder to myself, um, because Tom and I were talking about that. When you see 8 people a day, when you see 10 people a day, and people would ask him. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Tom Finley, he's an MD. He's an MD PhD. He's also a rolfer and went to the Guild for Structural Integration. And he's just somebody like you and me who can actually write prescriptions and order tests. He's a phenomenal scientist. His father invented epoxy. Okay,
Wow.
fascinating family. But anyway, he talked about people asking like, aren't you drained at the end of the day? Don't you take on their energy, or don't they take your energy, and that kind of thing. And which I can have an attitude about that, I'll be honest with you. At the same time, there is something to that. It just might not be what people think. But I'm like, oh my God, Tom Finley's going to talk about this, one of my science heroes. And he said, yeah, I think of it like a cup. And he talked about how you have your cup at the beginning of the day, and in your cup, maybe some days is more full than others. Okay. But that's what you've got to work with for yourself that day. And he said, now, people are going to come and see me and they're going to take from that cup. But you know what? Everybody's going to add to that cup too. And some might add more, and some might take more, and some might add less, or some might take less. But if I'm doing my job right, at the end of the day, I'm tired because I put in a good day's work, but my cup is full. And I put that cup on my shelf to remind myself of that every time I walk into my treatment room. Make sure that by the end of the day, your cup is full.
Yeah. Well, David, I think that's a really good place to leave this. We've been.
I agree.
I mean, yeah, it's fabulous. Thank you for that. And it just reminds me of also, there was a moment where you had an interview with Stephen Braybrook. Do you remember that? And
Yes, I do. It's great.
tell us about fascia, David. You know, what is that stuff? And you said something quite remarkable, which probably took you about a few minutes, and you nailed it all. And you were saying, if you take the fascia that wraps the nerves, the fascia that wraps the blood vessels, the fascia that wraps artery and bones, the fascia that wraps the ligaments and tendons, which are in fact thickenings of the fascia. Fascia is a network that transmits mechanical forces around the body, including the brain. And it was quite remarkable. And I've actually got that written. I think I sent it to you because I've got that.
You did. I remember that now. Yeah.
Slides on my slideshows. And what I'm going to do is I'll add those slides to this, because this will be
great.
And
I'd love to see that. I always wanted to be a meme. I think it's time that I became a meme. But that, no, I love the people out there listening to me that as much. There was a time, I think, before I did that interview, I think I was actually reading my book saying, okay, I need to remember what people think I know. So there is there is review and rehearsal, but I'm glad people like you are out there listening say, wow, that was really good, because I don't make notes beforehand unless it's a specific fact that I don't want to misstate a number about.
Brilliant.
So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.